The snow came down in sheets, the kind that erases the world. A woman stood on the cliff's edge, wrists bound, breath ragged, her cloak torn and crusted in frost. She was young, no older than 23, but the lines in her face weren't from age. They were carved by grief, hunger, and sleepless nights. Behind her, two men loomed, one with a crooked hat and silver tooth, the other broad-shouldered, red-faced, and angry at nothing in particular. "I told you not to run," said the red-faced one. His hand pushed the small of her back. "Now look where we are." She didn't beg, didn't scream, just stared down at the abyss below. Wind whipped her hair like black snakes across her face. The mountains groaned. The snowstorm howled. "Do it," said the silver-toothed man. "No one's lookin'. End it quick." The push came fast. And then there was nothing, only cold air, silence, and the white roar of snow swallowing her whole. *. 1 week earlier, the woman, her name not yet spoken, boarded a cracked old coach in a border town, carrying a worn leather satchel and a rolled deed to land she'd never seen. The ticket clerk glanced at her funny when she said she was traveling alone. But she smiled politely, adjusted her bonnet, and stepped inside. Two men joined her on that stage. The red-faced one introduced himself as Marshall Tucker, though he carried no badge. The other just nodded and flashed a mouthful of silver when he smiled. Said he was a prospector. They made small talk. Where she was headed. What she planned to build. She said she'd inherited the land from her husband, killed outside of Vicksburg after the war ended, not during. "Wrong place, wrong time," she said. She didn't mention the child they'd buried months before that. Or the nights she still woke up screaming. They told her how dangerous it was for a woman alone. How bandits worked the passes, how natives still roamed wild in the north. They offered to watch over her, to ride along. Just in case. She thanked them. But she didn't trust them. She knew the look of a man who's already decided what he's going to take. The first sign came that night, when they stopped at a trader's outpost near the mountains. The men paid for food but didn't eat. She caught them whispering. Glancing her way too often. When she left to use the outhouse, she found the red-faced one rummaging through her satchel. He grinned and claimed he was making sure no rats got in. By morning, the horses were gone. So was the driver. Only the two men remained. "Snow's comin' hard," said Silver Tooth. "We'll walk the trail. Safer that way." She tried to back away. That's when Red Face struck her. The next hours blurred, frozen ropes, a bruised lip, blood on her sleeve, and hands bound so tight her fingers turned blue. They led her through the snow-covered pass, guns drawn, until the trail vanished and the world became a blizzard. And still, she didn't cry. "You shouldn't ve lied," one of them muttered. "Said you were just a teacher. That deed in your bag says otherwise." It was never about her. It was about land. About greed. About the easy pickings they thought she'd be. By the time they reached the cliff, her boots were soaked through, and her knees shook from cold and blood loss. The world below was just white, no depth, no form. Only death. The push came without a word. She tumbled, arms flailing, lungs locked in one breathless gasp. The snow broke her fall, a thick drift built up over months. She slammed through it like falling through glass. Her vision flared white, then black. She came to hours later. Maybe minutes. Her legs screamed. Her head pulsed like a drum. But she was alive. Somehow. The sky above was slate gray, snow still falling. She tried to move, pain burst like fire from her ankle. It was twisted bad. Maybe broken. She spat blood and dragged herself from the impression her body had made in the snow. She didn't know where the road was. She didn't care. She was alive. And they thought she was dead. She crawled on her elbows and knees, gritting her teeth, dragging her frozen skirts behind her. There was no trail, only trees, only snow. A hawk cried somewhere above, circling, waiting. She laughed bitterly. "I'll die on my own terms," she whispered. The wind answered. Hours passed. The cold tried to eat her. Her fingers went numb, her lips cracked. But she kept moving. Memory pushed her forward, her husband's voice, calm and patient, teaching her how to tell direction from moss, how to find dry twigs under snow, how to breathe slowly when panic struck. "Survival ain't pretty," he used to say. "It's not about bravery. It's about being too damn stubborn to die." She saw something through the snow. A shape. Low. Wood and stone. A cabin? She blinked. Crawled. Fell face first. Crawled again. It was real. A small trapper's cabin, half buried by snow, the roof sagging under ice, one wall collapsed. She dug with her bare hands, shoved the broken door enough to squeeze through. Inside, silence, dust, a broken table, and a frozen hearth. She wept then, not from pain or relief, but because it was the first place she could be alone without fear. She tore off her gloves, unwrapped her scarf, and examined her leg. Swollen. Purple. But not shattered. She braced it with a snapped broomstick and cloth torn from her petticoat. There was no food. But she found old wood and a half-rusted flint near the fireplace. Her fingers fumbled, cracked, bled. She struck until sparks danced. Finally, a flame caught. The fire lit the walls in orange and gold. Her breath stopped clouding. She lay near it, arms wrapped around herself, her eyes fluttering shut. But something stirred. Snow shifted outside. Not wind. Not animal. Footsteps. Heavy. Slow. Purposeful. She froze, every muscle coiled. Then, nothing. The fire cracked. The wind moaned. She lay there, eyes wide, until morning broke gray and cold again. They thought she was dead. But she wasn't. She was reborn, broken, burned, and buried under ice. And that was going to be their mistake. The fire had long since burned down to embers when she heard it again. A soft crunch in the snow. Not the skittering of an animal, too heavy. Deliberate. Human. She stayed still, one hand gripping the broken leg of a table she'd sharpened through the night. Her breath was shallow, eyes fixed on the door, now half covered in drifting snow. Then the shape appeared, tall, cloaked in furs, framed by the pale dawn. He stepped inside slowly, as if testing the space. A man. Indigenous. Weather-worn. A jagged scar carved across his cheek like lightning. He looked at her with the calm detachment of someone who'd seen everything and decided most of it wasn't worth reacting to. She tensed. He didn't speak. Didn't move toward her. He only glanced at the fire, then to the corner of the room. There, beneath a plank, lay the cabin's old firewood stash. He pulled free 2 logs, tossed one on the embers, and crouched. The flames perked up with a crackle. She watched, frozen. After a moment, he stood, pulled something from beneath his cloak, a rabbit, skinned and stiff with cold. He tossed it on the table near her, then turned without a word and walked back into the snow. She didn't move for minutes. Not until the rabbit's weight reminded her she was alive. He came again that night. She heard him before she saw him, footsteps in the snow, the soft jingle of something metal. He entered, didn't look at her. Set down a bundle of herbs and melted snow in a tin. She sat up slowly. "I don't want trouble," she whispered. He didn't respond. But when she tried to reach for the herbs, her leg gave way and she gasped. He was beside her before she hit the floor. He didn't speak. Just knelt beside her, unwrapped the crude brace she'd made, and examined the swelling. She tried to pull away, but he held her still with surprising gentleness. He chewed the herbs into a bitter paste, then applied them to her ankle. The pain pulsed through her like fire. She clenched her jaw. Didn't scream. When he was done, he stood, left a small pouch by the fire, and disappeared into the night. Days passed. Or nights. It was hard to tell. The storm never truly stopped. Time blended into gray light and long darkness. Each morning, something new appeared at her door, dried meat, strips of sinew for binding, clean snow in a pot. And always, the same silent man, never staying long. She started calling him Ghost Walker in her mind. He moved like one, without noise, without urgency. She didn't know what he wanted. If he wanted anything. The third day, he returned with a piece of charcoal. He crouched by the fire, cleared a space in the ash, and began drawing. Mountains. A river. A trail. He tapped the spot they were on, then pointed northeast. She understood. He wanted her gone. She looked up, angry and cold. "You want me to leave? You think I can?" She pointed to her leg, then to the storm outside. He said nothing. Then, slowly, he pointed to her hands. The message was clear, *, you can't walk. But you can crawl. You can fight, *. That night, she waited until she heard the distant howl of wolves, then stepped outside, leaning on a stick like a crutch. The air cut her throat with every breath. She made it 5 paces before the snow collapsed beneath her. She didn't cry. She just lay there, staring at the stars. He found her minutes later. Scooped her up without a word, carried her back to the fire. He didn't scold her. Didn't look disappointed. Only wrapped her tighter in the furs he left behind. From that night, she began watching him closely. The way he moved. The way he never wasted effort. How he used the knife backward when gutting game. How he slept with his back to the wall, facing the door. She learned to mimic the way he tied bindings. How he tested ice with a stick before stepping on it. She mimicked everything. He noticed. The next morning, he handed her a bone-handled knife. Not a gift. A challenge. She nodded. Accepted. And so it began. A strange partnership built on silence, necessity, and flickering respect. She began walking short distances with a makeshift crutch. Set snares with his old twine. Used his fire-starting tools without asking. He never stopped her. They didn't speak. But trust grew in the spaces between. When a wolf approached the cabin one night, sniffing around the remains of a roast, she saw him tense, hand on his bow. "I've got it," she whispered. He didn't answer. But he stepped aside. She grabbed the sharpened table leg, moved slowly to the door. The wolf growled. She growled back. It worked. The beast slinked away, tail low. When she turned, he was watching her, expression unreadable. Then, barely, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. The next day, he let her follow him. He led her to a clearing where he taught her to make a snare. He didn't use words. Just gestures. Demonstrations. A glance when she did it right. A grunt when she didn't. She failed often. But never twice the same way. He showed her how to track rabbit prints, how to read broken twigs and twisted grass. She listened. By evening, they returned with 2 squirrels and a bundle of dry wood. She skinned the first one while he watched. Then he handed her the second. When they sat by the fire, he pulled a small pouch from inside his coat and took out a carved pendant, which shaped into the head of a bird. He ran it through his fingers thoughtfully, then held it out. She stared. "I can't," she began. He placed it in her hand. Then, as if deciding it was enough for one night, he stood and stepped out into the snow. That night, she dreamt of her husband again, his voice quieter now, no longer accusing. "You're not broken," he said. "You're still breathing. That means something." She woke up with frost in her hair, the bird pendant still clutched in her hand. The next morning, Ghost Walker returned with a stiff expression. His hand pointed to a mark on a tree outside the cabin, 3 straight lines carved deep, vertical and fresh. Not his mark. She limped to the doorway. Looked out. Tracks, boot prints. Too big to be his. Her breath caught. "They're coming back," she whispered. Ghost Walker looked at her. No fear in his eyes. Only awareness. Calculation. They stepped back into the cabin together. This time, she wasn't just a guest. She was preparing for war. The first gunshot split the trees like a crack of thunder, echoing through the ravine in jagged bursts. She ducked instinctively, fingers tightening around the carved bow Ghost Walker had pressed into her hands that morning. Smoke rose in the distance. Too close. The bandits had found the cabin. They had returned faster than expected, driven by greed, or maybe suspicion that the woman they'd pushed off the cliff hadn't stayed dead. She could imagine their faces, smug, violent, surprised she hadn't broken like kindling on the rocks. Ghost Walker crouched beside her behind the half-fallen wall, bow at the ready, his face unmoved. He touched her arm, lightly, and pointed to the ridge above. A signal. "Move now." She nodded. The traps they'd spent days preparing were ready, loops of tensioned wire, spiked pits masked in fresh snow, a rockfall just waiting for a careless bootstep. Not enough to kill them all. But enough to fracture their numbers, to disorient, to buy time. She moved through the trees, each step calculated, her injured leg wrapped tight, every nerve sparking with purpose. Below, 3 men picked their way through the snow, rifles drawn. Red face. Silver tooth. And a third she didn't recognize, new muscle, maybe, or a desperate drifter. She kept low. Raised the bow. Drew in a breath like she'd seen Ghost Walker do 100 times. But breath was hard to come by now. Her heart pounded against her ribs, a tribal drum in a war march. The third man tripped first. His leg disappeared into the snow. A moment later, the spiked trap beneath it slammed closed. His scream shattered the stillness. Silvertooth spun, firing blind toward the tree line. Ghost Walker's arrow flew silently from the ridge and embedded deep into his shoulder. The man shrieked, dropped his rifle. Red face bolted. But not away, from her. Toward the cabin. Toward the place he thought she'd be hiding. She let the bow fall. Drew her husband's knife from her belt. He didn't see her until she stepped from behind the tree, her silhouette framed by the low winter sun. "You," he hissed. His voice trembled. Rage, or fear, it didn't matter. "You should have died." "You should have checked," she answered, and lunged. The knife met flesh. He blocked the blow, grabbing her wrist. They wrestled in the snow, twisting, boots sliding on ice. She slammed her forehead into his nose, heard the crunch, and broke free. He staggered, blood pouring. But he was strong, and she was tired. He tackled her, knife clattering from her grip, both of them tumbling into a snowbank. His hand closed around her throat. She couldn't breathe. Darkness rimmed her vision. Then, an arrow. It struck Redface clean through the ribs. He let go, gasping, eyes wide in disbelief. She pushed him off. Rolled to the side. Ghost Walker stood on the ridge, his bow lowered. The man fell beside her, gurgling, dead within seconds. She lay in the snow for a moment, gasping, staring up at the gray sky. Her fingers curled around the ice-crusted handle of the knife. Ghost Walker approached slowly. He knelt beside her, not in worry, but in acknowledgement. You did not run, he said. It was the first time she had heard his voice. Deep, steady, quiet like stone. She blinked, stunned more by that than by the fight. Neither did you, she rasped, and let out something between a laugh and a sob. The man in the trap was still screaming, farther down the hill. Silvertooth had crawled into the trees, leaving a trail of red in the snow. Ghost Walker handed her an arrow. She took it. They moved in silence. Not for vengeance. For survival. For the final page of a story someone else had tried to write for her. The man in the trap saw her first. Begged. Pleaded. Promised riches, promised horses, said he had a daughter. I did too, she said. The arrow flew. The snow grew still again. When they returned to the cabin, the fire was low. Her hands shook, not from cold. From release. From the truth sinking in. It was over. Ghost Walker sat across from her. He passed her a strip of dried meat, and she took it. They didn't speak for a long time. There were no words left to fill the silence. Later, as dusk painted the trees in lavender shadows, she walked outside. Her breath rose in soft clouds. She looked to the place she'd nearly died. The cliff in the distance. The line between death and whatever this had become. She wasn't that woman anymore. Ghost Walker joined her, standing beside her like stone. They will not come again, he said simply. She nodded. They thought I was broken. They were wrong. She turned to him. What happens now? He didn't answer. Only looked east, where the mountains dipped and a trail vanished into forest. There were choices ahead. Unknowns. But this time, she would face them with a fire lit deep in her bones. She touched the pendant at her neck, the carved bird he had given her, and smiled faintly. Snow began to fall again. But now, it no longer felt like an ending. It felt like the start of something sharp, wild, and utterly alive. The snow had thinned by morning, replaced by a sky so blue it hurt the eyes. It stretched wide and open, framed by mountain ridges like the edges of a torn map. She stood outside the cabin, her breath slow and even, a pack slung over one shoulder. Beside her, Ghost Walker finished tightening the leather straps of a fur-wrapped bundle. They had said little since burying the bodies, 3 graves beneath pine trees, unmarked, save for the silent judgment of wind and sky. She had slept that night like someone who hadn't expected to wake. Not from exhaustion, but from release. The worst was behind her. But ahead, she still didn't know. Civilization lay east, down the ridges and along the old river pass. The nearest trading post, maybe a week's walk. Beyond that, the town that had once offered her a place, a future, maybe even peace. Ghost Walker moved with his usual certainty, the soft rhythm of motion that came not from haste but from knowing exactly what needed doing. She envied that. Not the quiet, not the solitude, but the clarity. He lived like someone who had made his choices long ago and never looked back. When she glanced at him, he was watching the trees. Listening. Always listening. I should go back, she said quietly. Her voice felt foreign in the still air. He didn't answer. Not with words. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small item, a wooden token, no larger than a coin. He held it out, resting it in the flat of his palm. A carving of a bear. No detail, just shape and strength. Its back arched, its eyes little more than notches. Next to it, etched into the wood, a bird mid-flight. She took it with careful fingers. The wood was warm from his hand, but it felt heavy, like it carried meaning she hadn't yet earned. What does it mean? She asked. He looked to the horizon. Bear is strength, he said. Bird is journey. You were both. It was the closest he had come to calling her anything. She tried to smile. I was terrified. He nodded. And yet, you lived. For a moment, silence again. Then he motioned to the west, toward the thicker forests and the land beyond. My people are that way, he said. 5 days' walk. Snow still deep, but passable. She followed his hand with her eyes. Endless trees, quiet paths, the unknown. The thought of going with him stirred something in her chest, not fear, not exactly. A sort of ache. The pull of belonging, or maybe the wish for it. I thought you didn't want company, she said. I didn't, he replied simply. That made her laugh, short and real. He turned and began walking, expecting no answer, no trail of footprints behind him. That was his way. She stood still, the carved token clutched tight in her palm. To the east, the remnants of a life she tried to rebuild. A town that might remember her name. A school with children who needed a teacher. A place where she could vanish into something ordinary. To the west, uncertainty. No promises. No comfort. Just more wilderness. And him. Her husband's voice stirred faintly in her memory. Asterisk, you don't owe anyone your grief, darling girl. But you owe yourself something better than surviving asterisk. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, Ghost Walker had stopped. He didn't look back. She stepped forward once. twice. Then stopped. No, she whispered to the trees. Not yet. He heard it. She knew he did. But he didn't turn. He only continued, one slow, steady step at a time until he vanished between two pines. She stood alone again. But it didn't feel the same anymore. She made her way east slowly, each step deliberate. Her leg ached, but it held. Her pack was lighter than she remembered packing it. She carried only what mattered now: knife, pendant, token, a strip of paper folded deep into her coat, her husband's last letter. She hadn't read it again. She didn't need to. She carried it in her bones. As she descended the slopes, the air grew warmer. Birds returned to the branches. Streams began to break through the ice. Life, impatient and reckless, was coming back. She reached the river trail 3 days later, mud caked to her boots, the fire in her muscles dulled but never gone. At the trading post, they stared at her. Ragged, silent, with a hunter's poise and scars that told stories no one dared ask. She traded the spare furs for food, a map, and a ride into town. When the wagon driver asked her name, she paused. Then simply said, "Teacher." They didn't question it. The town had changed. Or maybe it hadn't. It just looked smaller now. The new schoolhouse was being built. Children ran wild in the square. The sheriff eyed her with vague suspicion, then looked again and nodded slowly, as if he remembered a name from a list that once had been crossed out. She took a room above the bakery and slept with the window open to the wind. Each night, she watched the tree lean to the west. Wondering. Not waiting. When the school opened, she stood at the front of the room, chalk in hand, heart steady. The children stared. One little girl raised her hand and asked, "Are you the lady who survived the mountain?" She thought for a moment. "I'm the lady who came down from it," she said. And that was all that needed saying. Weeks passed. Spring crept in with green buds and melting roads. Rumors came with the wagons, of tribes moving quietly along the western slopes. Of a solitary warrior seen passing through, never speaking, only watching. The baker asked if she was scared. She shook her head. Not of him. Sometimes, she walked to the edge of town, carved token in hand, and looked west. Not with longing. With thanks. She knew who she was now. Not the woman who had been thrown from a cliff. But the one who'd climbed back up. And no one, no man, no storm, no silence, could take that from her again.